on offense, top 6 guys.
Mm-hmm.
Who do you like, and what are they going to have to give up?
I mean, I think the one guy that I've always been, a big fan of in terms of, I wish they either went after him. And again, it depends on what the team who currently has his rights is willing to, give up the guy for. But I think a guy like Kyle Palmieri stands out as a, top 6 proven guy who is both, an proven offensive guy, a guy who I think could fit in next to either Bergeron or Krejci. And is also, fantastic defensively as well. He's not Mark Stone, but he's kind of Mark Stone light a little bit. That, I think he's underrated in terms of what the overall kind of package he brings out on the ice. Veteran guy, I think maybe 28, 29, maybe just turned 30, but still a good age that, he's going to be a free agent next year, but you've got this 1 year with him, so the cost might not be as bad if you're willing to give up, some draft capital or a couple of prospects. So I think he's a guy that would be at the top of my list in terms of being a guy that would just solve that top 6 problem, without having to get too, crazy in terms of, really uprooting the entire roster. I think you put in Palmieri, you feel a lot better about how you go into next year where you don't have to worry about either one of those 2 lines. You put him with Krejci, you're all set. You put Pastrnak down with Krejci, you put him with Bergeron, you're all set. You got another great 2-way guy up there. He's a guy that stands out. I think you look at a guy like Besser out in Vancouver. That's going to be fascinating to see what they do this offseason because that team's core is stacked. Like you look at Vancouver and how they're built. They're what Toronto has thought that we're going to get for like the last 5 years. It's just like that group has worked so much better. And, guys like –
I'd rather see that out in Vancouver than in Toronto.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. I mean, you look at, Pettersson, who everyone knows is great, but I think you watch him in this postseason, you realize that dude like is already maybe like a top 10 player. Like he's friggin' legit. And Quinn Hughes is fantastic as well. He's going to be up there with Makar and Heiskanen, I think, and hopefully McAvoy is this kind of next wave of franchise defensemen. But you look at how many shitty contracts that Benning has signed over that time in Vancouver. Maybe ideally, they'd find a way to offload, Louis Eriksson's contract and some of those other terrible contracts they signed. But again, you look at the way this market is. I don't know who's going to take that money unless, I think everyone this offseason is more concerned with saving money as opposed to acquiring assets. So it's like, all right, we're going to be in a flat cap for a few years. I'm not taking another pick just to take your shitty Louis Eriksson contract off the books. I don't think anyone wants to do that this offseason unless you give up an absurd amount of assets. So, if a guy like Besser's available, that would be a hefty price. You'd be looking at, I think, Kahlo or someone like that. But he's a guy, though, that young, proven scorer, great shot, especially at even strength. He's a great even strength scorer, which is exactly what you need on this team. So he's a guy that kind of stands out. But I mean, there's a whole bunch of, top 6 guys or even guys who are, maybe middle 6 that could just fit in on a second line role that would work. But I think Palmieri, in terms of just being a veteran guy that makes the most sense, he's kind of at the top of my list in terms of how he would immediately impact this team.
So he'd be near the top of mine as well. I mean, Palmieri was talked about a lot at the trade deadline. I thought the Bruins were going to get him. I mean, he just made lots of sense, can fit in the top 2 lines. And he's not going to cost you a lot in a deal. I mean, this is a guy, as prolific as he's been. I don't think he surpassed the 60-point mark ever. So you're not – I mean, I don't think you're giving up a ton. You're going to give up a good amount because I think New Jersey knows
I think, first-round pick and 2021 first-round pick and, maybe Bjork and, a couple other prospects. It's not something where I think it's like, you're looking at friggin' like Studnicka or, maybe a few of these other younger top 6 guys where Kahlo has to be the pick you're giving up, like for a veteran guy on a 1-year deal.
I think you try to not give up that first-round pick because you've had so few. I think with that route, you also try to avoid Studnicka. So if you can get them to take a guy like Beecher or a guy like Frederick, I like that so much more. I mean, again, those are first-round talents. They're first-round talents. And if you can also pair Bjork with them, maybe Zaboral or Senyshyn. I mean, granted, they're, people know what they are. I mean, maybe New Jersey thinks they can retool them. But I think for sure you're giving up a top prospect in Beecher or Frederick and Bjork and maybe someone else, maybe a second-round pick in there. But I love Palmer. Love the player. Would absolutely want him on. Would want the Bruins to go after him. You mentioned by the way bad contracts for the Canucks.
Mm-hmm.
You know the Canucks signed Tyler Myers last July to that 5-year, $30 million deal. Like,
Yep.
what an absolute train wreck of a deal. 30 years old. You know, they have Louis Eriksson. Who are the other dumb contracts on the team? Roussel?
Those are the ones that stand out. But yeah, there's a whole bunch that are just, it's just like the volume of how many contracts, even ones that aren't like Louis Eriksson and Myers, the ones you stand out and you like rip your hair out. But there's just other ones where you're like, that guy's not carrying his weight worth of what that cap is when you got all these younger players and they're already in a cap crunch. They're not even paying these guys that are going to be due to get, major money next year. I know Besser's under contract. They signed him to a deal that is pretty good and should look pretty good for the next couple of years. But, when Hughes and Pettersson and these guys are up, like, holy shit, dude. Like,
What are
where's
you
all
going to
this
pay
money
them?
going to be?
Also,
Yeah.
Markstrom's a free agent as well.
Yeah, and I think he's gone. So
absolutely, it has to be. I mean, they can't pay him because he's gonna cost a lot of money. But so some other guys, I like Besser. I think he'd be great. I think you're gonna have to give up Carlo in a deal for him, but I do think that does make you a legit. And we said this before, to make these trades, and this kind of goes for any trade, but especially this Bruins team, you got to make sure your team's getting better. You got to make sure that you are getting the best player back in the deal. I think if you trade for Brock Besser, if you sent Carlo maybe a first for a guy like Besser. I mean, I think he's good enough. Potentially a guy like Bjork in there as well. I think you're definitely getting better. Your team is getting better. You're filling a need because you have right shot defensemen. I love Carlo. I don't want to trade Carlo. I don't think anyone wants to trade Carlo, but if you're getting your team better, especially for now, so be it. I think some other interesting names. I don't know if the Canadians would ever trade a guy to the Bruins. I can't remember the last Bruins-Canadians move. I don't think they do that. But a Max Domi is interesting to me. Interesting. Not someone I don't think the Bruins are ever going to get him, but he's had some big production years before. Top 6 guy.
You'd have a lot of guys at watering holes who are just pissed over the Bruins aren't the way they were in the 80s and stuff like that. Be very happy to get a kind of an agitator like Domi.